Dr. Lawrence Peck, President Park International Leadership. 이제 우리 닥터 로렌스 백 박사님의 박정희 대통령 국제 리더십에 관해서 about 10 minutes. 박수로 환영하시겠습니다.
반갑습니다. 초대해 주셔서 감사합니다. I first became familiar with Pak Jong-hee when I was in high school here in Los Angeles. There was a library book in a book sale, and it was the memoir of Pak Jong-hee after he died. The name of the book was The Country, the Revolution, and I. And I saw in the first page there was some Korean writing, and I put it in my bookshelf, and I forgot about it. Many years later, when I studied Korean language, I opened the book, and I said, oh, this is Hangul. He wrote Pak Jong-hee. He signed the book. When he visited Los Angeles in the 1960s, he met with the mayor. At that time, it was Republican Party Mayor Sam Yorty in the 60s, and Pak Jong-hee met him. He gave him this book. When Yorty died, he gave to library, and library gave away the book. They didn't know the Hangul writing was assigned to Pak Jong-hee. So I had it, and when I went to Seoul, I gave this book to the Pak Jong-hee Memorial Museum. So it's displayed there now in Pak Jong-hee Memorial Museum. Also, when I lived in Korea, I had a friend who was a reporter, and his job, when he was a young man, university student, his job was a personal assistant secretary, following around, writing all the notes from First Lady Yu Kyung-soo. He would follow and write all of her impressions and all of her ideas. This man was then a reporter in school, so I had some personal knowledge growing up of President Park. And of course, I know that a lot of the older generation in Korea still venerate and admire him and respect him because of what they saw in their lives that he achieved in Korea. Because as you know, in the 40s and 50s, Korea was still, at that time, a poor and an underdeveloped country. And they were very grateful to the term of President Park because of the great economic development. And the standard of living rises, huge improvement in the economics and the standard of living in Korea. And that's why your generations, and even the older generations than all of you, so respected President Park, I learned. But also, President Park had very important role and a very important impact in the field of national security and foreign policy, which is my area of expertise. Because you have to remember, the time when President Park was ruling Korea was a time of a great uncertainty and danger. It was not a peaceful or a calm era. It was during the Vietnam War period, and the U.S. was at the end of near the end of President Park's term. The U.S. was pulling back from Asia, withdrawing from Vietnam. The Vietnam veterans may remember Vietnamization, when the U.S. was pulling troops out, and the U.S. also pulled some troops out of Korea at that time. So it was a very dangerous time for the Republic of Korea, and President Park had to navigate and steer the course of the country. For example, he had the 1972 talks with North Korea. Of course, at that time, it was meant to try and reduce tensions on the Korean Peninsula, but we know now, later, through the records, the government records of the former Soviet Union and former East Germany, that at that time Kim Il-sung was telling the communist leaders he agreed to 1972 treaty as a tactic, as strategy, not for real peace. He wanted to deceive the world. He wanted to deceive the South Korean government that he was for peace, but it was really just a tactic. He didn't really support peace, Kim Il-sung revealed to his allies. Also, you know, later in the 70s was the period of the proposed pullout of U.S. forces from Korea under President Carter, one of the many terrible things that President Carter proposed. And you may remember General Singlaub at that time was the leader of the U.S. forces in Korea, and he resigned in protest. And finally, the American political world and people were able to have canceled the decision, thankfully, of President Carter to withdraw the troops out of Korea. Those of you who were in Korea in the 60s will know that that was a time when North Korea was waging a small scale, almost medium scale, war against the Republic of Korea. In English, the experts call it low intensity conflict. And the North Koreans, almost every week, almost every month, from 1966 until 1969, were attacking the Republic of Korea. They would send commandos and raid in the border. There was the famous Blue House raid of 1968, the Cheongwade raid, where they tried to kill Park Chung-hee himself. There was crossing of the border of commando teams, especially in the Gangwon-do area. There was the murder of the young boy, Lee Seung-bok, the famous Korean young boy who was murdered by the North Korean terrorists when he said, "I hate the Communist Party. 나는 공산당 싫어요." You know, we see these stories in the news every day. And he was slaughtered, he was butchered. They said the North Koreans did what Hamas is doing now to the babies and the children in Israel. They cut his head, they cut his face. The story of Lee Seung-bok in 1968 is just like the headline that we're watching now, what Hamas did to the babies in Israel. They cut his face in a terrible way, these evil people. Then Yu Gyung-soo was assassinated by a pro-North Korean agent in Japan, maybe connected with Cho Chong-yeon. She was murdered. A US airplane in 1969 was shot down, US reconnaissance plane, by the North Koreans. And of course, the Pueblo Ho, the ship, was seized by the North Koreans. All of these were major crises for the US and the Republic of Korea, which President Park had to deal with. There was also the international ties which President Park established during his time. You know, during the 1950s, there were many countries in the world, in Europe, in Asia, which did not have formal diplomatic recognition of Korea. And it was during the 60s and 70s which many of the countries of the world formally sent their diplomats to be represented, to officially recognize the Republic of Korea. Of course, domestically, President Park, one of the countries he established relations with was Israel, and he saw in Israel the kibbutz movement. You may know the kibbutz are the small rural agricultural villages in Israel. Those are the ones that the terrorists attacked 2 weeks ago, and they killed all the men, the women, the old children, the babies. Some of them kidnapped, some of them cut off the head. Those were the kibbutz villages, and Park Chung-hee was the one who realized that that was a model for Korea, and he established the Saemao movement, the Saemao Undong, to increase the prosperity in the countryside in Korea. He also developed the Gyeongbu Highway, the Gyeongbu Expressway. You know, the leftist, Kim Dae-jung, was against it. They were protesting against the Gyeongbu Highway, but Park Chung-hee went forward, and of course that enabled a lot of the economic development in Korea. You know, I was thinking, the shipbuilding industry, just as one example, the chaebol, which came up, which rose up, which developed under the leadership of President Park. You know, Korea really didn't have a shipbuilding industry before the 60s and 70s and 80s, and now it's one of the leaders in the world of shipbuilding. The last time Korea was building a ship was Kobuksun, maybe, under Lee Sun-shin. But now they're a leader in the world's shipbuilding. Before that, they weren't. Of course, I mentioned that Park Chung-hee really did remarkable, almost miraculous things in slashing the poverty rate, in slashing infant mortality. More babies survived. And that was, of course, what he is most remembered for and praised for. As a matter of fact, he also gave us Park Geun-hye, his daughter, who is president of the Republic of Korea. And I just saw a speech she gave yesterday in which she said a lot of the progress and a lot of the success of Korea today is due, of course, to her father. But President Park also praised the policies of President Yoon. And you know, there was some dispute between them because, as you know, President Yoon was a prosecutor, but I was happy and surprised to see that they were now joining forces, and President Park seemed to be praising the leadership of President Yoon. Finally, I'd like to say that President Park was named by Time magazine, the famous international publication, in 1999 as one of the top 10 Asian leaders of the 20th century. So we see there that it's not only the Korean elders who venerate and respect President Park, but it was international society who respected President Park. Well, I think I've come to the end of my 10 minutes now, so I thank you all again